Great. Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to today's Metagov seminar. I'm Sant Hosten, coordinator of the Metagov Governable Spacemakers Fellowship. And today I'm pleased to introduce our inaugural Spacemaker Fellows. Jenny Liu Zhang, the artist, Amanda Nicole Curtis, the speculative digital ethnographer, and Joanna Rivera-Carlisle, the digital governance engineer. Some brief introductions. Jenny is an American digital designer and artist who specializes in using speculative art practices to create meaningful participatory experiences online. She holds degrees in Bachelor's of Science from the University of Southern California in Arts, Technology, and Business of Innovation. And just as recently as last year, everyone please congratulate her, completed a Master's of Science degree in Narrative Futures from the University of Edinburgh. Amanda is a researcher and game enthusiast, exploring how immersive technologies and digital play shapes meaning making. She's currently completing her doctorate from the University of Oxford, where she researches how playing video games reconfigure the way people think, create knowledge, and make meaning in their everyday lives. And Joanna is an interdisciplinary researcher, developer, and designer. Her work focuses on the intersection of technologies with culture, heritage, and co-creation. She specializes in spatial technologies, extended reality, data taxonomies, and gamified interactions in the context of decolonial theory and cultural knowledge. Joanna holds a doctorate from the University of Oxford, as well as degrees from King's College London, Potsdam University, and the University of London. Today, we're joined by these fellows who will be presenting on their project, Small Houses Court, a game situated in and extending the governance experience landscape of Plot Twisters, an already existing online game world designed to foster self-reflection and emotional literacy. The project was developed as part of Metagov's Governable Spacemakers Fellowship, a fellowship designed to support the extension of governance capabilities in an already existing digital art artifact or world, and which has been supported by generous grants from Ambitious at the Center for Cultural Innovation, as well as the Henry Luce Foundation. In today's presentation, and the result of this fellowship includes both an interactive digital game, as well as a speculative ethnography report, of which the fellows will be discussing today. So as Val mentioned, please post your questions, comments in the chat. And after our 30-minute presentation, Val and I will co-moderate the discussion. So I'm very pleased to welcome Governable Spacemakers.
Thanks so much, Sant, for such a lovely and warm introduction. And thanks, Val, for organizing this. We're really, really excited to share with everybody what we've been working on for the past year as part of this fellowship. It's also really wonderful to see both so many new and old faces here. So a special thank you also to everyone who's contributed to this project so far. And we're excited to get it started. First thing that we will do is show a trailer that will outline what the Small Hassles Court is. I'm not hearing audio on my end this time around.
Is anyone else?
Maybe it's because I'm muted. Let me unmute myself. Maybe it's just like picking up my... How about this?
Plot Twisters presents Small Hassles.
Okay, I'll restart it.
Plot Twisters presents Small Hassles Court, a new minigame in Twisterland, our game world for self-reflection. Small Hassles Court is a playful space to navigate little conflicts between two people of equal power dynamic, friends, partners, and collaborators. Small hassles are usually about differences in opinion or miscommunication, from a dirty bowl in the sink to a comment that keeps you up at night. This is a space to address these problems, which may seem small, but can have big implications. However, the Small Hassles Court is not like other courts. It's medieval, but not in any historically accurate way. Unlike the common idea of a courtroom, there's no judge or punishments. The outcome is between the two people who are having the conflict. They decide what their resolution looks like. Players choose avatars that reflect their emotional state. Then they enter the court and meet Harry, a chronically overworked dragon that gently leads them through their emotional landscapes. With a shared session code, 2 players can board the elevator where they can select tags to describe the issue from their perspective. Then they enter the court. With the help of a fancy tapestry, players go through several rounds of conflict negotiation, sharing their positions and proposals for solutions. They can play for as long as they need until they reach an agreement or decide to accept their differences. Holding a grudge about a bowl in the sink? Have dirty laundry to air out? Come together in the Small Hassles Court. Just 2 people, a dragon, and a chance at figuring it out.
Thanks so much for that, Jenny. So today we're going to talk about our process of creating the Small Hassles Courts throughout this fellowship. So first we will discuss our framing of self-governance as emotional co-regulation and the governance frameworks that underpin the game design that went into this. We will then situate the Small Hassles Court as a minigame within the broader Twisterland game world, and we will have a really exciting gameplay demo, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the core UX mechanics before opening it up for Q&A. And Sent has already done such a great job of introducing us. So to put faces to the names that we'll be talking, I'm Amanda.
Sorry, I'm Jenny.
And I'm Joanna. Lovely that you're all here, and I'm going to get us started on a little bit of the background. So I think the first thing, once we run through some of the gameplay and what it looks like, that I think you need to know is that our approach to this was very much to look at governance in the smallest form that we could think of. So in our initial conversations, we were looking at existing games, we were looking at other Metagov projects, and we were really thinking about how we can translate governance, which is normally sort of more conceptualized in a communal way, in a way of like we're trying as a larger group to find solutions, agreements, or in an institutional way. How can we translate this to a really intimate level, to a level between 2 people, or just a self-regulation, an emotional internal level? So starting with the small stuff was really essential to how we conceptualized this game and how we built everything. And this is how we ended up with a 2-player single session game. And we see the Small Hassles Court very much as an infrastructure that allows people to rehearse this type of governance in a digital space. And the core conceptual mechanics that underpin everything are deliberation, nonviolent communication, and de-escalation. So these were our starting points for the literature that we looked at and the different projects that we drew from. Click. To give you an overview of what this looked like on our side is, so we would look at readings, we would look at different sources that we found. We would, in discussion with one another, isolate principles that we felt would translate well into interfaces. Click. And these interfaces at the beginning looked nothing like what the game looks like now. It was mostly about how does this principle, whether it was a de-escalation principle or a negotiation principle, how does this translate into a digital interaction? Click. And overall, just to give you sort of an impression of what we worked with at the beginning, we got this slightly chaotic cluster of how all of the different sources that we looked at fed into different types of interactions. And that was one basis of what we built this game structure from. The other big part was the existing infrastructure within Metagov and the other projects that we looked at and took inspiration from. And a core thing when you see the demo to look at is that in a conventional court, you would normally have a resolution in the form of a solution, that you have a judgment at the end, that you have someone who's right and who's wrong, you win or you lose. And we felt that that really didn't go with the governance principles that we were looking at and how we saw the idea of consensus, the idea of finding your own type of solution. So one underpinning principle, which we'll come back to at the end, is that our approach here was very much that you can win this game without finding a solution. Winning isn't about winning the argument, it's about aligning with the other person, it's about meeting each other halfway. And so we essentially came up with a resolution to the game that has two different modes. So one is solution based because, of course, if people can negotiate a solution that works for them, that's great. But that's not the only possible outcome. So there's also a process based outcome. If you can't find a solution at the given time, you can still win within the game in the sense that you align better, that you understand the other side better, and that you're still doing something towards the common ground that you're trying to find. And now Jenny's going to give you a bit more background in how this sits with the rest of the existing plot twisters universe. Sorry.
Awesome. So, for some context, Small Hassles Court is part of a bigger body of work. So, Amanda, Joe, and I are part of a design collective I founded in 2020 called Plot Twisters. So, along with about 6 other core members, we're creating an online game world called Twisterland, which people of all ages, namely young people, young adults, can play to reflect on their lives and build their personal narratives. So, the name of our collective, Plot Twisters, comes from the idea that as people, we go through plot twists or challenges and conflicts in our lives that are worth exploring for personal healing and growth. And we think self-reflection is important because the self is the first arena for social change. And as Joe was talking about, what happens at small scales influences the macro. So we came to Metagov because we see the realm of relationships as a space to build those skills of creating more positive, autonomous futures. So Twisterland itself will be a first-person responsive journaling game that empowers players to explore self-reflection topics and access games like the Small Hassles Court. So it'll be a conglomerate of a lot of different mini games, and aesthetically, the goal is to balance some playfulness and levity with compassion and care across the various experiences. So to just quickly preview some other aspects of the Twisterland game, the player will enter it's a first player game, so they'll enter through a lobby and they'll be able to explore 10 different neighborhoods in Twisterland, each of which cover different well-being topics. So each place reflects on different self-reflection topics like emotions and feelings, or thoughts and self-narratives, or goal setting and planning, and of course, relationships and social life. And the region in Twisterland that is dedicated specifically to relationships and social life is called Viewfinder Valley. And that is actually where Small Hassles Court will take place in our fictional world. So yeah, it's going to be a colorful city in Twisterland that explores relationships, roles, and social life, and topics like self-governance, consent, communication, and collaboration.
By being able to situate the Small Hassles Court within Twisterland, specifically within Viewfinder Valley, we were then able to consciously adopt the world's whimsical overtones and ironic symbols in the design of this mini game. So we are explicitly using irony and subversion as tools to facilitate conversation and communication between people. This use of subversion is not about mocking conflict or making light of emotion. It's about shifting the stakes and giving us the space to hold some weight for issues that might seem small, but actually will hold importance in our relationships. Because far too often in many systems, especially legal or institutional ones, conflicts become high pressure. They're fast, people become defensive, the goal becomes about winning and being right, and we wanted to interrupt this pattern. So the Small Hassles Court is not a simulation of a legal courtroom. There are no judges, there's no punishments, there's no verdicts. And we knew quite early on that we were working with volatile material because the metaphor of the court is not necessarily neutral. For some, it evokes law, order, justice, but for many, it also evokes trauma, exclusion, and violence. So the speculative premise here of using the Small Hassles Court was never intended to simulate a real legal court, but rather we've been thinking about how to refract its principles through humor, specifically through absurdity and irony. There's a rich history of combining legal concepts with humor as a way to be able to come together, to have commentary, and to be able to rethink what systems look like. So instead, we twist the idea of a court and transport players into a medieval courtroom, not a judicial one, as a way of reimagining what fairness, attention, and being heard could look like. And so enter Harry, our chronically overworked dragon herald, and through his theatrics and a little bit of melodrama, players are guided into a space that feels theatrical, not procedural, and we really wanted to center the idea of being silly but sincere at the same time. And so this sets the tone for the micro governance that Joanna talked about in the beginning of this, of how we can tend to these small frictions without needing to escalate. So rather than asking who's right, the Small Hassles Court in its subversion asks, how do we come together? And games are in many ways a really rich and fertile environment for us to think about and subvert and reimagine troubled systems. As Miguel Sicart writes, play is a way of engaging with rules so that we might understand and reimagine them. So that idea became really central to our process because games are not just escape, they are a form of speculation. They offer players opportunities to directly interact with systems and to think about how else could this work? How can we play with this? Also, how can we break this? So games give us a space for alternative logics, for us to have playful inversions and rule bending. And really important, games have always been a space for players to be able to test out different lenses. And for us, it means to test out the what ifs of a system. What if conflict wasn't about winning? What if it was about being seen? And as Goffman reminds us, play is one of the primary ways that we as people, as a society, negotiate and renegotiate social order. It lets us rekey key activities like courts, arguments, decisions into safer, stranger, and more reflective spaces. So we explored this concept throughout the fellowship, also by playing different games that combine this notion of legal with fun and play. So we looked at games like Ace Attorney, Justicar, and Guilty as Sock, thinking about turning this idea of a courtroom drama into something that is a space where justice can unfold through spectacle and story. And it taught us that courtroom mechanics can be ripe for subversion, with humor sort of working towards critiquing and expanding. And so that's what we tried to bring to the Small Hassles Court, not a simulation of law, but a playful space for deliberation.
Awesome. So now to officially introduce the first version of the Small Hassles Court game. So to recap, it's an interpersonal conflict resolution minigame meant to be played by two people. It's a communication tool for live conversation. So two people would play this in the same room or on the phone together synchronously. And it's whimsical and playful while also giving space to the weight of small frictions in daily life. So it's live online, so you can access it after this, but right now I'll take a few minutes to just walk through a tour of the court and its game mechanics. So this is the cover screen, the landing. So when you hit play, you are put into the courtroom and you meet Harry, who is the animal guide that will be facilitating the experience for you. So he says, "Hello, welcome to the Small Hassles Court, where we give small problems the attention they deserve. I am Harry, and for me, even small issues feel big because I am quite small. Therefore, I am familiar with all kinds of small hassles and will be your guide in this space today." And then he'll take you through to get your avatar selected and everything so you can begin a session. So before you get into that, we introduce what a small hassle is, and we have 3 key points here. So the Small Hassles Court is intended for issues that exist between 2 conflicting opinions. So it's specifically designed for 2 people or 2 groups of people or 2 groups of opinions. It's not meant for like bigger groups or like a crowd or a family or anything like that. It's also meant for people of comparable power. So not for parent and child or power relations like that, but more for friends, flatmates, or partners, where people have equal footing in the social dynamic. And it's also intended for issues that are tangible and not overly personal. So tensions, not like insurmountable character traits that can't be overcome. So we just have a disclaimer: if the hassle does not fit within these bounds, you can still play the game, but the design is not, it may not optimally support you to address your issue. So the user will read this, agree, consent, and then when they consent, they can proceed. They would enter their name, and then they would choose an avatar to enter the game. So the avatar selection screen that we have is, it functions like a Likert scale, a scale of 1 to 5, where the scale represents emotional elevation. So level 1 would be like you're feeling calm and cool, so cool as a cucumber. And level 5 would be like, I'm fired up, I'm very passionate about this hassle I'm about to be talking about. So as a user, you would pick which one you feel most resonant with. So the cactus here is a level 4. It's prickly. I feel prickly. And then I can enter the court. So now in the court, you can start a session with another player by entering a session code, as I kind of showed quickly in the video, or we can take a tour with Harry. So for this walkthrough, we'll just do the Harry tour. So Harry says, "Let me show you around. I'm just on my way to a case. Follow me." So we'll enter the elevator, and in the elevator here, we meet the other player's avatar. And in this mock situation, the other player is his cousin Eugene. He doesn't always look like this, but he's fired up, apparently. And Eugene says, "I don't even know what this is about, Harry." So Harry says, "Well, this is what the elevator buttons are for. Click on the button pad." And both sides, both players have access to their own elevator pad where they can click on it and fill out tags for what they think the conflict is about from their perspective. So in this case, we have several rows of tags. So this first set up here are topics that on the surface the conflict may be about. So maybe it's about money or privacy or cleanliness or schedules. This next set of tags are about perhaps what the underlying feelings or needs or values that are under the surface in a small hassle. So maybe it's not just about cleanliness, but it's about respect or honesty or freedom or appreciation. And then we have some playful options here, and the user can always check "I don't know" if they don't know why they've been brought to court. So in this situation, you would click 3 buttons, 3 tags to represent what you think the conflict is about. For Harry, he says, "I brought Eugene here because he has been using my scales as coasters on his work desk, and he finds this very frustrating. I think that's disrespectful and also annoying." So the tags that Harry's picking are privacy, boundaries, and respect. So that's what they look like when they're selected. And then after both players make their selection, they would enter the medieval court, which is the setting where the negotiations take place. So on either side of the court, you would see your players' tags. So Harry's are over here and Eugene's are over here. Eugene selected freedom, communication, and space. It looks like we're not on the same page at all. But that's okay. We're here to understand each other better. And so to start, we enter the negotiations when Harry brings in this table, and this is the visual signifier that we're about to begin the rounds of negotiation and sharing our positions. So on this table is a tapestry. It's kind of a magical, playful tapestry, but you can click on it, and once you enter, you begin the rounds process. So the first prompt that the users will see is opening statements, where they will state what they think the issue is in 1 sentence. So Harry will write, "You use my skills as coasters on your work desk." That's what he wants to open as his opening statement. And then Eugene has replied, "This is about Harry being an oversensitive little baby dragon." To which Harry replies, "Hey, Eugene, you know that the Small Hassles Court is not a place to insult others. We're here to understand each other, not make things worse." Eugene says, "I'm sorry." And he says, "It's okay, we can all get carried away, but it's good to recognize when you've hurt someone else's feelings." So once both players have stated what they think the issue is, they can click next to move on to the next prompt. So this next prompt here is called assumptions. So it's about reviewing the other people's statements and being able to identify if there are any assumptions or judgments they feel have been made. So this is Eugene's statement, and Harry definitely feels like some assumptions have been made. So he replies, "You are judging me for being oversensitive and a baby." And then Eugene replies back that you're assuming I use your scales as coasters on my work desk. Harry says, "I don't know how that's an assumption. That's just a fact. But I guess we're not at the point of discussing it." So after this exchange, the two players can send good vibes or say I'm sorry as a way to close out the prompt. And in this case, Harry just wants to keep the peace, keep good vibes for now, so he sends good vibes. So the tapestry closes, and that is to show that the end of the round has happened, and you can see what the player has sent at the end of that round. So now the tapestry is going to give another prompt to attempt problem solving. And it's okay if you don't resolve the issue. You can go through multiple rounds of negotiation. And if none of them work, you can always come back to the Small Hassles Court and try again. So some resolutions need time. So the Small Hassles Court is ideally this online destination that you can go back to. So Tapestry opens, and now it looks like this next prompt is called Perfect Scenarios, where now that you both understand perhaps a little bit more about each other's position, what do you think is the ideal scenario to the issue that's been described? So the format of this activity is an ad lib, and so Harry will fill out this ad lib. So in this situation, his perfect scenario is, "I would like you to stop using my scales as coasters so that you can be more respectful toward me and I can do my work in peace." Eugene will read it and then he might make edits. So in this case, he says, "I would like you to stop being so sensitive so I can put my cup down without staining the table and you can do your work in peace." Harry says, "I don't think he gets my point at all. I'm not being sensitive. I just don't want his office to snicker behind my back every time I come to pick him up for Pilates class." So he can accept his proposal or amend it, and Harry feels like they're on very different pages right now, so it might take a while. This is an example of an amendment. "I would like you to use other coasters so you can put your cup down and I can be respected in the office," and so on. So the amendment and proposal process can go back and forth for a little bit. So if the players don't resolve their conflict, they can revisit their original statements. And after that, there are two more rounds, at least two more rounds lined up to help them find a compromise or make concessions. But Harry says, "I won't keep you here through all of that as Eugene can be very stubborn. But if you take someone to the Small Hassles Court, try to bring time and patience. Conflicts can take time to resolve even if they're small on the surface. And if you don't resolve things fully, that's okay too. This is a space to understand each other better, and that can happen even if you don't find a specific solution to a problem." So now back in the foyer, the user can start a session with another friend, but this is kind of the general state of the game. So two-player session and a tour with Harry.
Okay, I'm going to just tie this back into what we sort of talked about at the beginning in terms of where we were coming from here. So Jenny just mentioned that there is this round structure which came directly out of the research that we did and the discussions that we had about how do we create a space where we give people sort of the maximum amount of freedom to make their own decisions within a system that is sort of guiding them towards listening to each other. And the way we've structured this is that we have three possible phases. So you can, after each phase, you can finish the process, you can finish the game, either because you found a solution or because you agreed to disagree in the sense that maybe you realize you're so far apart from one another that there isn't a common ground that you can find. And each of these phases consists of at least two prompts. So you have at the beginning, you have the opening statement, that's sort of the baseline of you need to understand what the issue is about. But then the position round is for establishing what you're saying with the opening statement, whereas the common grounds are intended to be sort of the space for negotiation. Click, please. So for the position rounds, they're essentially throughout the game, there are two options. So you saw in the tour the assumption prompt. So this is where you're examining the other person's statement and you're saying what kind of assumptions are they making. And there's an alternative to this, and these will normally be randomly allocated throughout the rounds, which we call the devil's advocate. This is where you examine your own prompt, where you have to look at where do you see weaknesses in your own point, in your own argument, in order to make people critically think about where is the other person coming from and what am I saying here. Click, please. And then the common rounds, which are about exploring possibilities for a solution and negotiating, exercising active listening. How can we find a consensus between us? What does our sense of justice in this scenario look like? These are following the same format that is in the tour of that one person makes a suggestion, the other person has the option to amend, and that can go back and forth a couple of times. The only difference between different phases and rounds, so if you play the game multiple times, this will always be slightly different, with slightly different Harry lore strewn in between, is that what you saw in the tour is the perfect scenario. So where one person articulates, ideally, I would like this. And the two alternatives for this as a starting point for negotiation is a compromise. So this would be, where do you see a compromise that could happen between our two positions? And the concessions, which is more directed at where do you think you could make a concession versus where the other person could make a concession. So you can kind of tell they're all in a similar realm of making yourself confront the potential sort of biases that you hold in your own position and think about how could you maybe move away from your own position in order to meet the other person. But they're all framed slightly differently so that you don't feel as you go through the rounds that you keep answering the same questions. But they are angled around the same principles of trying to listen to each other and are based on slightly different pieces of literature that we went through at the beginning. Click, please. And when you go through a two-player session, the two options that you have at the end, irrespective of whether you play one round or if you go through all three phases, is that you find an agreement. So that can happen after the first one. This can happen after 3 rounds, and you can come back as well. Or you can exit without an agreement, like Jenny said, where Harry, as the NPC, acknowledges that some conflicts just take longer to resolve. He usually has some example of a witty case that he couldn't solve. And you're invited to come back at a later point in time. And this is very much a direct translation of where we started thinking about what we want the governance principles that underpin this game to be and how they translate into actual gameplay. I think this is one of the most sort of direct translations that we do have these two possible outcomes rather than having sort of a way of winning the game. Now, Jenny already said this is the initial version of this, and throughout the fellowship, we explored lots of different avenues of shapes this could take. Click, please. And the tour was actually something we added relatively late because we realized that with all of our efforts to make it very self-explanatory, the easiest way of showing people how it works was to have this sample case where Harry sort of walks you through it with a fictional case, rather than people going into the two-player session straight away with an issue that they have and having to figure out as they go through it how it works. Now, other components which are not included yet, but which are sort of just before implementation, are the other courts. So the medieval court was not our only premise when we went into this. We also thought about a food court or a volleyball court or a basketball court, and figured that the interactions visually in this would look slightly differently. So that's definitely a future direction that we're interested in exploring. I think the next implementation point is going to be to add resources because we talked about, especially the lobby of the Small Hassles Court, as this potential space where people can also come to find resources and materials on how to sort of improve your emotional literacy. And we figured that it might be quite a helpful sort of add-on to provide some of the resources that we used in our research that exist in the wider plot twisters community in order to make that accessible to people as another way of using this space other than playing the actual game. And then the last and slightly more complex element of this, especially in terms of our concerns around security and privacy, was a public gallery. So this was a big part of this discussion earlier on because we really wanted to give people the opportunity to share their processes, their potential solutions, how they approach this, in order to have these little case studies of different forms of governing consensus between two people. However, the reality of do we make this little GIFs that you can download? Do we make this text-based? How do you share this? How do we manage both players consenting to this being publicly available? How would this be shared? Was a level of complexity that we weren't able to address within the fellowship, but is something that we've thought very thoroughly about and that we're very keen to add because for the three of us, this was a big part of what we wanted this game to be as a digital space. And we want to say before we go into the Q&A that we're very open to additions and ideas for other directions this could go into. So we would really welcome if anyone had input on this.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much for listening and watching, and we're really excited to hear your thoughts and continue this conversation. I want to give a very special thank you also to Sent, Kyle, Annie, and Jake who helped make this happen, and especially to everyone who's engaged in our earlier community call or our open play testing sessions. I see some of you here, so thank you so much for being a part of this journey. And you are more than welcome to go to smallhasslescourt.com, and if you have somebody you want to play with, you can call them up on the phone, try to go into a small hassle, and let us know how it goes.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for your very detailed presentation and very entertaining trailer. I see lots of digital hand clapping, so I'm very happy to see that. We have one question from Liz, and then some additional comments starting to come in through the chat. I think there's also maybe a point from Val that would be nice to pick up on. Since we're kind of we have a more compressed period of time here, I'm wondering if we could bundle some of these, and unless one has a strong desire to elaborate on them, I can read them. Actually, no. Maybe Liz, do you want to voice your question and then we can follow it with Val and then we can have the team answer them at the same time, if you like.
Sure. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm really excited about maybe bringing some of my nieces and nephews in to test the Small Hassles Court. But when I work in a peace building context, this question of compromise gets a lot of attention put on it. What are the trade-offs that we might make when we find, because there's not really like an in-between. We're not on like a single plane and that we could get in between our positions on. So trade-offs and conditions are really important. And I just wondered, yeah, I'd just love to hear that from you all. Thanks.
And then can we bring Val in as well? Because I think some of the elements of Val's wondering here can kind of bridge these two questions.
I'm not sure. I think maybe letting the team answer Liz's question. I'm not sure if my question fits quite in yet.
Okay.
Shall I speak to that? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. This is something that we talked about quite a lot with trade-offs and conditions. The way we incorporated this into the compromise was to give people repeated options of making minor changes and rephrasing things. There are obviously scenarios where there isn't a compromise to be made and you can't meet in the middle. That was part of the motivation for us to have different options and not going with you have to find a compromise, but rather you can also articulate what is a concession that you think the other person can feasibly make, and that you could discuss this in a separate round without having found a compromise. But yeah, that is something that we discussed a lot, and also to which degree, and I think that's going to be something that we fine tune, to which degree we sort of give people pre-designed tools in order to articulate their thoughts, and to which degree we leave it up to people how they want to define their conditions. Like, do we say you have to provide a condition? Do we say you have to give a trade-off, or do we leave this open? So yeah, that was a big part of the process, but it is also something that I think the more we actually test it with people, the better we can fine tune it.
Okay,
Also,
great.
I wanted to quickly add in, I think it's quite useful also to see the structure that has been built for the compromise round. So right now it is an ad lib where it is phrased, what if I do blank activity, you do blank activity, and we both get shared outcome. So this is the structure that's built into it right now to try to encourage people to think about in this compromise scenario that you are both actively doing something. And it is at the moment up to the players to see if that is actually a compromise that feels right for them. But exactly as Joe said, that's something that with more testing and fine tuning to flesh out what does compromise look like.
I just have one quick follow-up question because you had so many great resources and foundational methodology that you built on for this work. I just wondered if the way that anything from consent-based decision making that's taught through understanding the difference between precise preference and range of tolerance might be something that's in here somewhere.
That's actually really helpful. I think that would be great to explore how those two examples look like in options that we provide. That's really helpful.
Great. Maybe we can turn to this question of the kind of target or intended age range, or kind of the relationship between power between the two. There's this question from both kind of Val and Steve about wondering what this would look like in classrooms. And also, I see Jenny's already responded a little bit to Steve's question about how would children who are not maybe independent or in a kind of situation or structure where they would tend to be on equal power levels with each other, kind of engage with this game.
Yeah, I can take that. So a lot of I think as a team, we have a lot of interest in designing tools for youth, young people, like age 10 and over. Obviously, there are a lot of like security, safety related things. We need to get certain certifications to be able to like properly test and do the research with kids under 18. So right now, for the purpose of this prototype and the first version of these concepts, the game is for young adults. So we're imagining like 18 and up. So people who are maybe navigating adulthood and social relationships and on their own for the first time in life, but definitely mature enough to like understand and be literate in some of these topics. So that's kind of the scope that we focused on for this. Definitely, as far as taking it into classrooms and considering the factors that I guess like for kids, for children, I think that there are so many social, emotional, and security questions. So I know, Steve, that you're talking about like how do we bring this to kids without having them be embarrassed about something like this? I think for the most part, this particular experience is designed for like equal footing relationships, people who are like probably interfacing pretty frequently with one another already. We haven't thought about cases where it's like confronting like a bully or confronting someone that's like a little bit more like relationally distant. So this in its current iteration is designed for like people who have a rapport and are interested in maintaining a relationship. They just want maybe a tool or external facilitation to help that conversation happen. And that takes a level of like self-awareness, and it takes a level of like being able to articulate like what is bothering you that I think we don't have all the stops in this game right now to like equip kids who maybe don't have as developed skills in that to like, I guess, have that up to par experience yet. So I guess
But
that's
but
also
I'm a little confused because this is being put on that island in whatever the name of the fantasy land is, which is for a younger demographic, correct?
so right now, that is the bigger vision. Yes, the bigger vision is that we are going to be moving toward designing for like younger people. A lot of this doesn't exist yet in its like in a play tested format. So the Small Hassles Court is a first version of one of the games in this bigger vision, and it's unified by like these self-regulation topics, by the like personal narrative building ideas and concepts that we've done a lot of research about, but we've focused them on just testing in like young adult environments for now, simply because I think as a part-time design collective, there's limited bandwidth as far as like doing, the due diligence of reaching young kids at this time. And also, we just kind of want to get a tool out there so that we have a prototype to begin iterating on. So hopefully that makes sense. We're like creating like the thesis statements for like what these games will be and are. And then as we, learn more and as we can and have more bandwidth to bring them to wider audiences, we'll be able to add and extend onto that thesis statement to accommodate the edge cases that you're talking about. Does that clarify it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call them edge cases, primary cases, but yeah, otherwise it does. Yeah.
Totally. Yes. Just in the scope of, I think, where we're at right now.
Maybe on that point, since I don't see any questions in the chat, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, there is this comment about wanting to be able to change the state of the icon, which I know is something that was also discussed during the course of the fellowship. But there are other ways in which Plot Twister also changes state, like the sky changes colors, as I understand, depending on different variables. Also, the state that you are in when you're in Plot Twister kind of primes or predisposes you to the type of interactions you might have here. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about state change and also one aspect that wasn't touched on in the presentation, which is cooperation. So there was previously an idea for kind of internal, like waiting period kind of cooperative game that kind of tried to use some of the kind of digital native elements of a game to foster collaboration in a very low stakes way when two people are coming to a situation with some kind of conflict.
Sorry, to clarify what you mean by state change, are you just referring to like the environmental change and the avatar change of the players and the
The
experience?
avatar change, I think even if I remember correctly, in the speculative ethnographer report, there's discussions about how some of the future courts that you were imagining might change the way that conversation happens between the players. So this kind of version has a kind of relatively stable kind of state that each player occupies, where the environment doesn't really change based off of the kinds of amendments or the kinds of discussion that they're having. And I think there was some discussion about more cooperative and also more state change type interactions that where the environment kind of is a supplementary force to.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Jenny, do you want to speak to that or shall I?
I think my main thing is that I think ideally the game does adapt to the, I guess, the the feelings and the nature of the conversation that the players are having in the space. So definitely I saw this comment about like changing the avatar like throughout or between the rounds so that you can keep a common pulse on what the other person is feeling. So I definitely think that there's room for that. We've also talked about, and this isn't perhaps related to the cooperation point, but having like a shared artifact that as you go through the game, you are creating this. And there was this vision of the tapestry, for example, being something that like based on the types of rounds or prompts that you're answering and the way that I guess the responses are going, the tapestry becomes more intricate in its design or changes color or adapts to the nature of the situation so that both players can feel in coalition as they're going through this experience together, and then they leave the session with this shared artifact. So I think these are just like some simple ways that I was thinking about it, but for sure, Joe, do you have, yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to add to this, because again, there's a lot of the elements that you can see in this version are definitely there to be built out. And I think the tapestry is a good example. Like the reason it's a tapestry and why there's tapestries in the lobby is because we talked a lot about what cooperation could look like and what it could mean to have a task that you're actually doing while you're having this discussion. So why we decided to not do this in this initial version was because we didn't want to overwhelm people with too many things at the same time. So while we were still figuring out, do the rounds work? Does this format work? What length of text do we let people write? And so on. Having on top of this a game we had, for instance, we actually fully developed this as a side game called Catching Dust, where the idea was that as you're waiting for the other person to write their answer or to respond to something, that you help Harry sort of catch some dust that's bothering him around the room. And we talked about different levels of like how this could be also a calming mechanism. We talked about having a sidebar in the elevator where you could do breathing exercises, where you could uh, journal, have different types of self-reflection opportunities. Ultimately, for this version, this was really a time restriction. So the few sort of build out options that I talked about are absolutely not the only ones that were there. I also maybe to directly respond to the how does the state change? We did talk about the lobby long term potentially being this option where you can actually see other people's avatars that are online in the lobby parallel to one another so that you could enter the court and there would be lots of cacti in there or lots of fires. And you don't know who these people are and you're not actually interacting with them, but you have an awareness that they are also online in this virtual space at the same time. So, yes, we have thought about lots of different avenues, but unfortunately did not have time to implement most of them.
I do want to quickly flag mindful of time sent, and also if there's anything else anyone wants to ask. In the speculative ethnography, we do briefly touch on what Sent mentioned of the sort of environmental state. So in the food court, it's sort of this idea that like perhaps the player is drinking a milkshake and this might give the player a brain freeze, so their responses are lagged a little bit. It takes a little bit longer for them to respond. And so thinking about what those mechanics could look like in different courts and how that might impact forms of communication. And this version right now, as version 1.0, we have thought about it in terms of it being a tool to help a sort of live communication between people. So you might be on a Discord call with someone, or you might be having a conversation, and this game is a tool to facilitate it. And that decision to have it framed this way for this initial version of it has also impacted then some of the decisions around, do we need the catching dust mini game right now? But yes, these are ideas that we are looking forward to implementing in the future, and some of them are discussed a little bit in the report that you will be able to read at the end of the week.
Great. And on that note, I will say that the full documentation of the fellowship, including the playable game, speculative ethnography, recording of this seminar, is going to be published this Friday on the Metagov website and on our Substack newsletter. So if you're not already subscribed and would like to get that update, I've shared some links in the chat. And I've also shared a link to the Small Houses Court directly in the chat as well. So I'd like to invite everyone to come off of mute and give either a visual or audio applause to thank our fellows for their presentation today. 3, 2, 1.
Thank you. This was amazing.
Thank you.
I love it
Thank
so
you all.
much, you guys.
Lots of very
Harry
good work
loves
in development.
you.
He's so silly. Thank you,
Great.
guys. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.